The morning sun was bright, but the narrow streets of the small neighborhood looked quiet. Officer Brian parked his patrol car near a small yellow house at the end of the lane. He had been assigned to visit this place after a neighbor had called about some noise the night before. It was probably nothing, but Brian had learned to check every call seriously. He stepped out of his car and looked around. The street was lined with simple houses, most of them with small gardens and laundry hanging outside. A few children were playing with a ball nearby, their laughter filling the air. But the yellow house stood still, as if holding its breath. Brian knocked on the wooden door. He waited, hearing footsteps inside. The door opened slowly, and a woman appeared. She looked tired but calm, wearing a plain blue dress. Behind her, a young boy of about 10 peeked out, holding onto her dress with small hands. "Good morning, ma'am," Brian said politely. "I'm here about a noise report from last night. I just need to ask a few questions." The woman nodded slowly. "It was probably the wind, officer. The shutters bang sometimes." Brian noticed her voice was soft but cautious. He also noticed something unusual inside the house, from where he stood at the doorway. He could see part of the living room. It looked neat, with a small couch, a table, and a few books on a shelf. But on the far wall, partly hidden by a curtain, something metallic glinted in the light. It caught his attention right away. It looked long, dark, and too precisely shaped to be a household object. He stepped a little to the side, trying to see it more clearly. That was when he realized what it was: a Barrett M95 sniper rifle, standing tall against the wall. Brian's heart gave a quick jump. This wasn't something people kept in their living rooms like a vase or a lamp. The M95 was a serious weapon, powerful and rare. Why would a small family in a quiet neighborhood have such a thing on display? He kept his voice calm. "That's an interesting item you have there," he said, nodding toward the corner. The woman's eyes flickered for a moment, and she gently moved to block his view. "It's just an old thing," she said. "It belonged to my father." Brian wasn't sure whether to believe her. He had been in the force long enough to know that every unusual object had a story, and sometimes that story could change everything. He didn't want to cause alarm, but he needed to understand. The boy was still watching him, eyes wide, as if waiting to see what would happen next. "May I come in?" Brian asked politely. The woman hesitated, then opened the door wider. He stepped inside, noticing the faint scent of wood polish and tea. The living room felt warm, almost too warm, as if they had closed it off for a while. The Barrett M95 was now fully visible. Its black frame was clean, its scope polished. This was no dusty heirloom. Someone had taken good care of it. Brian glanced at the woman. Her hands were folded tightly, and she seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "Your father owned this?" he asked. "Yes," she said quietly. "He had a past. He was in places where such things were needed." Brian could tell there was more to the story. He also noticed a framed picture on the shelf, a man in uniform, not a police one, but something different. Foreign, perhaps. The man's face was stern, his hand resting on the same kind of rifle. The boy finally spoke. "Mama says it's part of our history. We keep it so we remember." Brian looked at the boy, then at the woman. He felt an odd mix of curiosity and caution. He had not come here expecting to see a weapon that could change the way he looked at this family. The call had been about a noise, but now it seemed there was something deeper here. Something about the past, and maybe the present to dot as he stood there. A breeze from the open window made the curtain sway, revealing more items on the wall: maps, an old leather bag, and a metal pin to a frame. This was no ordinary living room. It was a quiet gallery of a life most people never knew. Brian realized he had to decide how to handle this. He could file a report, ask for more information, maybe even call for backup. But something in the woman's steady gaze told him she wasn't a threat, not in the way he had been trained to expect. Still, the Barrett M95 was no harmless decoration. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his tone respectful, "I think you should tell me the whole story, from the beginning." The woman took a slow breath, glanced at her son, and nodded. "Then you must sit down," she said, "because it is not a short one. And so, in the warm living room of the small yellow house, surrounded by pieces of another world, the story began. Lila led Officer Brian into the living room and motioned toward the couch. Amir, her young son, stayed close to her side, his small hands clasped nervously. The morning sunlight fell across the room, casting a warm glow over the furniture, the books, and the curious objects that lined the walls. Brian could not help but glance again at the rifle standing in the corner. It was impossible to ignore, yet the calmness in Lila's demeanor eased his immediate concern. She poured tea into 3 small cups, her movements deliberate and steady. The smell of brewed tea mixed with the faint scent of polished wood. Brian accepted the cup and nodded his thanks. "I can see you take good care of your home," he said, trying to keep the conversation gentle. Lila smiled faintly. "I have always believed that a home is a place of peace. Even if the past was full of challenges, a house can still be a sanctuary." Brian sipped his tea and nodded slowly. "I would like to understand the past," he said. "I want to know about the rifle and why it is here." Lila looked at her son, who had not taken his eyes off the officer. "Sit down, Amir," she said softly. The boy moved closer to her and leaned against her side. "You will hear this story too. It is a story of responsibility and courage and how it shaped our family." Brian settled onto the couch, careful not to sit too close to the rifle. Lila began in a quiet, steady voice. "The rifle belonged to my father. He was a man who worked in distant lands long before I was old enough to understand the world. His work required careful decisions and protection of others. This rifle was part of that life, not for harm, but for safety." Brian listened closely. He had seen many dangerous weapons in his line of work, but this explanation was different. Lila spoke with respect and care, not fear or pride. Her words painted a picture of a life lived cautiously but honorably. "My father always told me," Lila continued, "that power is not in the weapon alone. True power comes from knowledge, patience, and understanding. He taught me to respect the tools we have and to never let them control our actions." Brian leaned back slightly. "So, it is more than a weapon. It is a lesson," he said, understanding the depth of her words. "Yes," Lila replied, "and now I teach the same to my son. He must learn that strength comes from wisdom, not from what can be held in the hands." Amir listened carefully, his eyes wide but thoughtful. "Mama says that if we understand the story, we are never afraid of the object. We only respect it." Brian nodded. He admired the boy's ability to understand the lesson. Many children would have been curious, or even fearful, but Amir was calm and attentive. He could see that Lila had already given him lessons in responsibility that would guide him for life. Lila motioned toward a small cabinet. She opened it and revealed a collection of letters, journals, and photographs. Each item was placed carefully, almost ceremoniously. Brian could see that these were more than memories, they were reminders of a life shaped by purpose and discipline. "These letters are from my father," Lila said. "They tell of the people he helped, the decisions he had to make, and the lessons he wanted me to learn. Each page is a reminder of what is right, what is wrong, and the importance of careful action." Brian picked up one of the letters. The handwriting was neat and precise, each word chosen with care. He read a passage aloud softly. "Courage is not in the fight, but in the choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Wisdom is the shield that guides strength." He looked at Lila. "He was a thoughtful man, and you have kept his lessons alive." Lila smiled faintly. "I try. It is not always easy, but it is necessary. The rifle reminds me that life can be unpredictable. It reminds me to teach my son carefully. It reminds me that strength is responsibility." Brian glanced at Amir again. The boy's hands were folded neatly in his lap, his attention on the conversation. "Do you ever think about using it?" Brian asked, nodding toward the rifle. "Never," Lila said firmly. "It is not meant for today's world. It is only a teacher, a reminder. That is all." Brian felt respect rise within him. He had walked into a home expecting to investigate a small complaint. Instead, He had found a family guided by principles far more powerful than fear or force. Here, the past was alive, not as a threat, but as a foundation. Amir spoke softly. Mama says that the story is stronger than the object. If we understand the story, we never feel afraid. Brian smiled. He realized that the boy had already absorbed the lesson of responsibility and respect. This was more than a home. It was a place of learning, of quiet courage, and of measured wisdom. Lila motioned to the photographs on the wall. These are the people my father worked with. He helped many families in distant lands. Some never knew his name, but they remembered his actions. This is the lesson I want to pass on. Brian nodded. And you have passed it on well, he said. He looked at the rifle again. It was no longer just a weapon in his mind. It was a symbol. A silent teacher. The morning moved on. Sunlight shifted across the living room, and the house felt peaceful. Brian realized he had learned something valuable. Today, sometimes courage was not in action alone, but in knowledge, care, and responsibility. As he stood to leave, he thanked Lila for sharing her story. I have seen many homes and families, but yours is unique. I will remember this lesson, he said. Lila smiled faintly. Remember it well, officer. Respect and wisdom are stronger than any object or fear. Amir waved at Brian as he left. The house, the boy's confidence and calm left a lasting impression on the officer. He walked back to his car, reflecting on the morning. The neighborhood was quiet once again, but his thoughts were full of stories, lessons, and understanding. He realized that some homes held extraordinary teachings, quietly passed down from generation to generation, and sometimes the strongest protection a family could have was not in weapons, but in the knowledge, respect, and courage that guided every action. Brian started the patrol car and drove slowly through the streets. He glanced back at the small yellow house one last time. It had been a visit meant for investigation, but it had turned into something far more meaningful. Here, a mother and her son had quietly carried the lessons of the past into the present. And that, Brian thought, was the truest kind of strength. The next day, the neighborhood felt quiet and ordinary. The sun shone on the small yellow house, giving it a warm glow. Lila was in the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Amir. When the doorbell rang, she paused, wiping her hands on a towel. Visitors were rare, and she did not expect anyone. Amir looked up from the table. Mama, who is it? Lila shook her head. I do not know. Perhaps a neighbor. She moved to the door carefully and opened it. A man stood there, wearing a neat uniform, but not a police uniform. His badge was unfamiliar, and his expression was serious but calm. He held a folder in one hand and a small device in the other. Good morning. The man said politely, My name is Daniel. I work with the Historical Records Division. May I come inside for a moment? Lila hesitated. She could sense no threat, but she was cautious. Please, come in, she said after a pause. Amir stayed close to her side, his eyes curious. Brian, who had visited the previous day, was still on patrol in the neighborhood. Lila wondered whether she should mention him, but Daniel ignored the rifle in the corner at first. He opened the folder and laid some papers on the table. I am researching families who preserve historical artifacts, Daniel explained. Your father's work is known in the archives, and your home has items of importance. I would like to ask some questions about them. Brian would have felt tension in this situation, but Lila remained calm. She knew her father's legacy was valuable, and Daniel's polite demeanor reassured her. I can answer questions, she said, but first, you must know that these items are not weapons to us. They are lessons, reminders, and part of our history. Daniel nodded. I understand. My goal is not to take anything. I only want to record the information so it can be preserved for the public record. He looked around at the living room. The rifle, the photographs, and the letters were all there. Amir pointed to the rifle. This is part of our story, he said proudly. It teaches us responsibility. Daniel smiled. I can see that. May I take notes? Lila gestured to the table. Please, everything here has a story, and I want it remembered correctly. For the next hour, Daniel asked questions. He took notes, examined photographs, and read letters. He was careful and respectful, listening to every detail Lila shared. She spoke of her father's travels, the families he helped, and the lessons. He taught her about patience, courage, and wisdom. Amir added small details. Mama says we learn to be careful and thoughtful. That is why we respect the rifle. Daniel nodded and wrote it down. This is important. Many people do not understand that objects carry lessons, not just power. Brian, who had returned to patrol the area later that morning, noticed the unusual activity at the yellow house. He parked a short distance away and watched for a moment through the window. He could see Lila speaking to a man he did not recognize. He decided to step closer and politely announce himself, just to make sure everything was safe. Lila saw him and waved. "Officer Brian," she said. "This is Daniel. He is here to learn about my father's history." Brian nodded and greeted. "Daniel, I'm glad you are respectful," he said. "These lessons are important." Daniel looked at Brian and smiled. "I understand completely. I am here to preserve stories, not to disturb them." The three of them continued talking. Daniel asked about the maps on the wall, the medals, and the journals. Lila explained each carefully, and Brian listened, learning more about the family's history. He felt a sense of admiration for how Lila had maintained her father's lessons and taught them to Amir. After a while, Daniel paused. "I see the rifle is a Barrett M95, he said. "It is rare, but your explanation shows it is part of a family's story, not a threat. May I take a photograph for the record?" Lila nodded. "Yes, but remember it is a teacher, not a weapon. That is the story I want preserved." Daniel took a few careful photographs. He made notes and asked about the history behind each one. Every question Lila answered was full of respect and thought. Brian noticed how calm Amir remained, how carefully he listened, and how he understood the importance of the objects in their home. As Daniel packed his folder, he smiled at Lila and Amir. "Thank you for sharing your story. It is rare to find a family who preserves history with care and respect. I will make sure this is recorded properly." Lila smiled faintly. "Thank you. I hope the story teaches others the same lessons it taught me and my son." Brian felt a deep sense of respect. He had visited many homes in his career, but few had such calm, quiet strength. This family had faced challenges and preserved important lessons without fear. That was something rare. Amir waved at Daniel as he left, and Daniel waved back. The house returned to its quiet state, sunlight filling the room. Lila looked at the rifle, then at her son. "It is good to share the story," she said softly. "It reminds us that knowledge and respect are more important than fear." Amir nodded. "I will remember, Mama," he said. Brian stayed for a moment longer. He looked at the living room, at the rifle, the photographs, and the letters. He realized that sometimes protection was not about force. Sometimes it was about understanding, wisdom, and careful teaching. When he finally left, he felt that the neighborhood had been a place of learning, not just routine patrols. He drove slowly through the streets, thinking about the lessons he had seen in the yellow house. Knowledge and respect were stronger than fear. That was something he would carry with him for a long time. And in the quiet house, Lila and Amir returned to their morning, filled with warmth, tea, and the knowledge that the past could teach lessons for the present. The rifle remained in its place, a silent teacher, standing tall and respected, reminding them that every story had a meaning beyond its shape. The next afternoon, the yellow house was quiet, as if the morning never happened. Lila and Amir were in the living room. Lila was reading a book, while Amir practiced small sketches on a notepad. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting a calm glow across the room. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. Lila looked up. Visitors were rare at this time of day. She walked carefully toward the door and opened it. Outside stood a young woman, holding a small package. She looked nervous but polite. "Hello," the woman said softly. "My name is Nina. I have something that belongs to your family. I was told it should be returned to you." Lila raised an eyebrow. Return to me. May I see it? Nina nodded and handed over the small package. Lila took it gently. The package was old, wrapped in brown paper, tied with a string. She unwrapped it slowly, revealing a small wooden box. The box had delicate carvings, symbols Lila recognized from her father's letters. A mirror leaned closer. "What is it, Mama?" he asked. Lila opened the box carefully. Inside were several medals, a folded letter, and a small key. Her eyes softened as she recognized the handwriting on the letter. It was her father's, sent many years ago, but never delivered. Brian, who had been on patrol nearby, noticed the unfamiliar visitor and came closer to the house. He walked up the path and knocked politely. Lila saw him and waved him in. Brian entered, his presence calm but alert. "This is Officer Brian," Lila explained to Nina. "He has visited before and knows our story." Brian nodded to Nina. "Hello. I just want to make sure everything is safe." Nina smiled faintly. "Thank you. I only came to return this. I found it while organizing my grandfather's things. He had kept it for many years." Lila carefully unfolded the letter. Her eyes scanned the neat handwriting, and a faint smile appeared on her lips. "This is from my father," she said softly. "It explains the medals and the key. He must have sent it long ago, but it never reached me." Amir's eyes widened. "What does it say?" "Mama," Lila read aloud, "these medals represent acts of courage and service. They are to be kept safely. The key opens a small chest with more records of our family's past. Keep these things carefully and remember the lessons they teach. Knowledge and responsibility are stronger than fear." Brian watched her carefully. He realized the importance of this moment. Lila was not only preserving the past, but now she was receiving something she had never had before. The lessons of her father were returning to her, like pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together. Nina spoke softly. "My grandfather said your family always deserved these. I wanted to return them properly." Lila nodded. "Thank you. You have done the right thing." Amir looked at the medals and the key with curiosity. "Mama, can we open the chest?" Lila shook her head. "Not yet. We must understand the lessons first. We must be patient." Brian smiled. "Patience is part of what makes strength meaningful. You have taught him well, Lila." Just then, a sudden sound came from the street outside. A commotion of voices and hurried footsteps. Lila and Amir froze. Brian immediately moved toward the window to see what was happening. Down the street, a delivery truck had stopped, and a man seemed confused, holding a large map. Children were running around, and a small crowd had gathered. Something about the man's actions suggested he was lost or looking for something urgently. Lila felt a strange sense of worry. "Something is not right," she said. "That man seems troubled." Brian nodded. "I will go check. Stay inside and keep Amir safe." He stepped outside, calm but alert. Nina followed cautiously, curious about what was unfolding. Brian approached. "The man, excuse me, sir. Are you okay?" The man looked up, relief and worry mixed on his face. "Yes, officer, but I need help. I am trying to find an old property that belonged to my family. I was told it is near this area." Brian nodded. "Do you have an address?" The man shook his head. "Not exactly. Only a description and a map from my grandfather. I do not want to bother anyone, but I must find it." Brian studied the map. It showed landmarks that matched the neighborhood, but one detail stood out, a symbol similar to the ones on Lila's father's letters. In the wooden box, Brian's instincts told him that this was connected to Lila's family history. He returned to the house. "Mama," he said carefully, "the man outside seems to be looking for something related to your father. He has a map, and it matches some symbols we have seen here." Lila's eyes widened. "It could be someone connected to my father's work," she said. "Perhaps a distant relative or someone who needs guidance. We should help him." But carefully, Amir looked curious but stayed close to his mother. "Mama, can we help him too?" Lila nodded. "Yes, Amir, but we must remember our lessons. Patience, understanding, and respect come first." Brian stepped outside again. this time with Lila and Amir at a safe distance inside. He guided the man toward the yellow house. "We have someone who can help you," he said. The man looked relieved. "Thank you. I do not know why, but I feel this house is connected to what I am seeking." Lila greeted him gently. "Welcome. We can try to understand what you need. Everything here has a story, and perhaps your story connects to ours." The man explained that his grandfather had worked closely with Lila's father many years ago. The wooden box, the medals, and the key were part of a larger collection of records. He had only found a clue recently and had been trying to return it to the rightful family. Brian listened, amazed at the unfolding story. This quiet neighborhood and this small house had become the center of a living history, connecting generations through respect, lessons, and responsibility. Lila carefully examined the key and smiled. "It seems your grandfather knew what he was doing. These things are meant to return to the family, and you have brought them here safely." Amir's eyes sparkled with curiosity and excitement. "Mama, can we learn more about them now?" Lila nodded. "Yes, but we must remember the lessons. Patience, care, and understanding guide everything. Only then can we learn the full story." Brian realized that the quiet yellow house had become more than a home. It was a place where history, lessons, and courage were preserved, and now, with the arrival of a new visitor, another part of the story would unfold. The man smiled, grateful and relieved. "I feel that I am in the right place. Your family has preserved these lessons well." Lila nodded. "It is our duty to protect them, not just for us, but for the future. And now, together, we can continue to learn and share the lessons of the past." As the sun shone brighter over the neighborhood, the small yellow house stood quiet yet alive with stories, lessons, and the promise of new understanding. The afternoon sun cast a warm light over the yellow house. Lila, Amir, Brian, and the visitor, whose name was Thomas, gathered around the small wooden box that had been returned to them. The box sat on the table like a quiet treasure, its carved symbols catching the sunlight. The air was filled with anticipation, a mix of curiosity and careful respect. Lila held the key in her hand, feeling the weight of her father's trust. "This key has waited many years," she said softly. "Now it is time to see what he wanted us to find." Amir leaned forward, eyes wide. "Mama, what do you think is inside?" Lila smiled gently. "I do not know exactly, Amir, but I believe it will teach us something important, just as the letters and medals did." Brian watched carefully, ready to step in if anything went wrong, though he felt confident this was safe. Thomas looked equally attentive, as if he understood the significance of the moment. With deliberate care, Lila inserted the key into the small lock and turned it slowly. The click echoed softly in the room. She lifted the lid, revealing a collection of documents, small photographs, and a few objects wrapped in soft cloth. Thomas leaned closer, his eyes bright. "These must be part of my grandfather's records," he said. "I never thought I would see them again." Lila began to unwrap one of the objects, a small medal with intricate designs. She held it gently, examining the engravings. "This is another lesson," she said. "It shows that courage is quiet. It does not seek attention, but it protects and guides." Amir reached out carefully to touch a small photograph. It showed a young man, strong and confident, holding a rifle similar to the one in their living room. "Mama, is this Papa?" he asked. Lila nodded. "Yes, Amir, this is your grandfather when he was young. He worked hard to protect others, to teach lessons, and to guide people safely. That is why we have these items. They are reminders of what is right." Brian felt a quiet admiration. He had encountered many families, many histories, but few preserved knowledge with such care. Here, every object, every letter, every medal had meaning beyond its shape. Thomas carefully opened one of the documents. "These are records of people my grandfather helped," he said. "He kept notes of families, travelers, and those in need. He recorded the lessons he learned and wanted them to be shared with the next generation." Lila nodded. "My father did the same. He wanted us to understand responsibility, courage, and respect." These items are proof of his life's work and his care for others. Amir held a small journal. "Mama, can we read this one?" Lila smiled. "Yes, but we must read slowly and think carefully. Every word has meaning." They opened the journal. Together, the pages contained detailed notes, sketches, and advice written in neat handwriting. Each entry described situations where careful thinking, patience, and understanding solved problems better than force. One page read, "Always observe. Before acting, strength is measured not by what you hold in your hands, but by what you choose to protect and how you guide others." Brian leaned closer. "This is remarkable. Your father's lessons are timeless. They teach courage, not through weapons, but through wisdom and careful action." Thomas nodded. "I have read some of my grandfather's notes, but these connect directly to your father's work. It seems they share the same values and principles. That is why these records are important." Lila carefully placed the journal back in the box. "We will keep them safe and continue to learn from them," she said. "Amir, remember what you see here. True courage and strength come from knowledge and care, not fear or force." Amir nodded solemnly. "I will, Mama. I want to learn everything." Brian felt a quiet sense of respect. He realized that he had entered a home expecting a routine visit, but instead he was witnessing a living history lesson. Lila had preserved not only objects, but also the wisdom behind them, and now, with Thomas present, the lessons were extending even further. Thomas pointed to a small folded map in the box. "This map shows locations my grandfather and your father worked together," he said. "It could help people understand their journeys and the guidance they provided." Lila studied the map carefully. These are places where decisions mattered. Each location represents a choice, a challenge, or a lesson. We must treat this knowledge with respect. Brian looked at Amir. "Do you understand why this is important?" he asked. Amir nodded. "Yes. Every object and story teaches us how to be responsible, how to help others, and how to make careful choices." Thomas smiled. "Exactly. That is why these records were preserved. They are not for power or control. They are for learning, understanding, and guiding the next generation." Lila carefully began organizing the items back into the box. Each medal, letter, and photograph was placed neatly. "We will continue to add lessons," she said. "Amir will learn from them, and one day he will share them with others. That is the purpose of this collection." Brian felt inspired. He had spent years enforcing rules and protecting communities. But here was a family teaching protection through knowledge, responsibility, and respect. It was a different kind of strength, one that could last for generations. The afternoon moved slowly. The sun shifted in the sky, casting long shadows in the living room. Lila looked at the rifle in the corner, then at the box she had just unlocked. "These lessons are connected," she said softly. "The objects remind us of the choices we must make. The stories guide us, and our actions reflect what we have learned." Amir nodded. "I understand. Mama, I will remember everything." Thomas carefully packed his folder, making notes of what he had seen and learned. "I am grateful that these lessons are preserved so well," he said. "Your family's dedication will help others understand the meaning behind history and responsibility." Brian stood and smiled. "I am glad I visited again. I have learned that courage, patience, and understanding can be just as powerful as anything else. This family shows how to live with wisdom and care." Lila looked at all three of them, her eyes calm but filled with quiet pride. "Our duty is to continue the lessons, to protect what is important, and to guide those who come after us. That is the true meaning of strength." As the afternoon sun slowly faded, the small yellow house was filled with a sense of accomplishment and quiet wonder. The chest had been unlocked, the lessons revealed, and the history preserved. Lila, Amir, Brian, and Thomas shared a moment of understanding, a realization that true power comes from knowledge, care, and responsibility, and that the past can guide the present and future. Amir leaned against his mother. "Mama, I understand now. Courage is quiet, but it is everywhere." Lila smiled and hugged him gently. "Yes, Amir, That is the lesson I hope you will always remember." Brian looked around the room one last time before leaving. He realized that the yellow house was not only a home, but a place where history, lessons, and wisdom lived on. The objects were more than they seemed. They were reminders of what it meant to live with care, respect, and courage. And so, as evening approached, the house remained quiet yet alive with stories, lessons, and the promise of understanding that would continue for generations. The morning was quiet at the yellow house. Lila moved carefully around the kitchen, preparing breakfast for Amir. The sunlight fell gently through the curtains, giving the room a soft, golden glow. Everything seemed peaceful, yet Lila felt a sense of alertness deep inside her. Lessons from the past often returned in unexpected ways. Amir was at the table, drawing sketches of the metals, letters, and maps they had recently explored. His small hands moved with care, replicating the details of each object. "Mama," he said quietly, "I want to learn more about the places on the map." Lila smiled. "Soon, Amir. First, we must understand the lessons fully before we travel or explore. Knowledge comes before action." Brian arrived shortly after, walking up the path with his usual calm presence. "Good morning," he said. "I thought I would check in and see how things are today." "Good morning, Officer Brian," Lila replied. "Please join us for breakfast." As they ate, Thomas returned. He had spent the night organizing the documents he had collected. "I have found more information," he said. "These records tell of situations where decisions mattered. Some involved helping families in danger, and some involved protecting important knowledge. I believe these lessons are meant for Amir as much as for any adult." Amir's eyes brightened. "I want to learn. I want to understand everything." Lila nodded. "We will guide you, Amir. You must pay attention, think carefully, and always remember responsibility." Suddenly, a knock came at the door. It was harder than before, urgent and unexpected. Lila felt her heart beat faster. She carefully opened the door, and a young man stood there, looking anxious. He held a small envelope. "Hello," he said quickly. "My name is Jason. I was told to deliver this to your family. It is very important." Lila took the envelope carefully. "Please come inside," she said. "We will read it together." Brian observed the situation quietly, ready to act if needed. Thomas and Amir followed, curiosity mixed with caution. Lila opened the envelope and found a letter inside. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but neat. As she read aloud, her expression grew serious. "It says someone is in danger near the city, and only people who understand careful planning and responsibility can help. They have asked for our guidance." Amir looked up, concern in his young eyes. "Mama, what does it mean? Are we going to help?" Lila nodded slowly. "Yes, Amir. This is a test of what we have learned. The lessons from the past are not only to understand, but also to guide our actions when needed. But we must act wisely, calmly, and safely." Brian stepped forward. "I will go with you. We can plan carefully and make sure everyone stays safe." Thomas agreed. "I can help organize the information from the documents and maps. We can use what we have learned from the records to guide us." The group gathered around the map. Lila pointed to several locations marked by symbols. "These are important," she said. "They show where the risks are and where people may need help. We must study the paths carefully before we act." Amir traced the paths with his small finger. "Mama, I understand. We must be careful and think before moving. That is what the lessons teach us." Lila smiled faintly. "Exactly, Amir. Courage is not rushing forward blindly. Courage is knowing when and how to act." Brian looked at the map. "We can plan a safe route to reach the location. We need to anticipate problems and decide what to do if anything goes wrong," Thomas added. "We can also use the notes from your father and my grandfather. They wrote about similar situations and how careful planning saved people and preserved knowledge." Lila carefully folded the map and set it aside. "Amir, your role is to observe and learn. You must remember the lessons and help guide our actions with your understanding." Amir nodded, determination in his eyes. "I will, Mama." I promise. The group prepared for the journey. Lila packed essential items, including the journal, the letters, and a few tools for communication. Brian checked the route and planned for safety. Thomas organized the documents so they could reference lessons quickly if needed. As they stepped outside, the sunlight felt brighter, and the quiet neighborhood seemed alive with anticipation. The test of lessons from the past was about to begin. The path to the city was filled with small challenges, narrow streets, unexpected obstacles, and unfamiliar directions required careful thought. Amir observed everything, noting patterns, signs, and details. He remembered his mother's words, observe first, act wisely, and always respect what you do not fully understand. They reached the outskirts of the city. There, a small group of people awaited guidance. They were anxious, but relieved to see Lila, Brian, and Thomas. A young woman approached. "Thank you for coming," she said. "We were told that only those who understand responsibility and careful planning could help us." Lila nodded. "We are here to guide you. Stay calm, listen, and follow instructions." Courage and wisdom go together. Brian led the group through the first part of the city. He guided them carefully, keeping attention on potential obstacles and ensuring everyone remained safe. Thomas referred to the documents and suggested routes based on lessons from the past. Lila and Amir observed every detail, ensuring that each step followed the principles of knowledge, patience, and responsibility. Amir felt proud. He saw how lessons from home could guide actions in the real world. Courage, he realized, was not only about bravery but about thinking, understanding, and protecting others. As they reached the location described in the letter, the people needing guidance looked relieved and grateful. Lila carefully explained steps to ensure safety and order. Brian organized movement and ensured everyone followed instructions. Thomas helped reference lessons from the documents to avoid mistakes. The situation was resolved calmly. Everyone was safe, and the group learned the importance of careful planning, observation, and thoughtful action. Amir felt a sense of achievement. He had participated in the test of lessons, observing and understanding courage and responsibility firsthand. Lila smiled at him. "Amir, today you have learned more than any story can teach. You have seen lessons in action. You have understood that courage is careful, strength is knowledge, and responsibility guides all actions." Amir nodded. "I understand, Mama. I will remember." Brian looked at the family with respect. "I have seen many situations, but today I learned a new kind of strength. This family shows that true courage and protection come from understanding, planning, and care." Thomas added, "The lessons from the past are living lessons. They guide not only history but actions in the present and future." As they returned to the yellow house, the sun set gently over the neighborhood. The house stood quiet, filled with warmth, knowledge, and the promise of more lessons to come. Lila, Amir, Brian, and Thomas knew that courage, patience, and responsibility would always guide them, no matter what challenges arose next. The sun rose over the quiet yellow house, casting a warm glow across the garden. Lila moved through the kitchen, preparing breakfast as she always did. But this morning felt different. The events of the past few days, the return of the box, the arrival of Thomas, the test in the city had left a sense of calm accomplishment in the air. Amir was at the table, sketching quietly. His drawings were of metals, maps, and the people they had helped. He paused, looked up at his mother, and said, "Mama, I think I understand now. Courage is not just about being brave. It is about thinking, planning, and helping others." Lila smiled softly. "Yes, Amir, that is the lesson your grandfather and father wanted you to learn. True courage comes from understanding, not fear or anger." Brian arrived soon after, walking up the path with his usual calm presence. He carried a small notebook and a pen, ready to record anything useful for his work. "Good morning," he said. "I wanted to check in and see how things are today." "Good morning, Officer Brian," Lila said warmly. "Please join us for breakfast." Thomas was already there, organizing the documents they had explored during the past week. He looked up and nodded at Brian. I have completed notes from the chest and the city visit, he said. It shows the importance of careful planning, observation, and understanding the lessons of the past. Brian leaned back and observed the room. I have seen many situations in my career, but nothing compares to what I have learned here. Your family shows that protection and courage are more than rules. They are understanding, responsibility, and respect. Lila nodded. Yes, we must teach these lessons, not just live by them. That is why every object, letter, and story in this house matters. They guide us. And now they will guide Amir as well. Amir looked up, eyes bright. Mama, can I help teach others one day? Lila smiled. Yes, Amir. When you are ready, you will share the lessons with those who need them. But first, continue to learn. Every experience teaches us something new. Brian added. I think you already have. Today in the city, Amir saw lessons in action. That is how real understanding begins, by applying knowledge carefully and calmly. Thomas agreed, and the records from our families are not just memories. They are tools for learning and guidance. The past can always help the present when we pay attention. The day moved slowly and quietly. Lila, Amir, Brian, and Thomas spent time reviewing the documents, maps, and medals. Every detail was discussed. Every story examined. Amir asked questions, learned the meaning behind every object, and began to understand how his family's history shaped their actions. In the afternoon, there was another knock at the door. Lila opened it to find a small group of neighbors. They had heard of the family's actions and wanted to express their gratitude. A woman spoke first. We saw how you helped the people in the city. Your family's lessons guided them safely. We want to thank you for teaching courage and responsibility. Lila invited the neighbors inside. Every lesson is stronger when shared. Please sit, and we will explain what we have learned. Knowledge grows when it is given, not hidden. Amir looked excited. Mama, we can show them the chest and the letters. We can explain the lessons we learned. Lila nodded. Yes, Amir. Show them what is important. But remember, respect and careful explanation are key. The neighbors listened closely as Amir, with Lila's guidance, explained the meaning of the medals, the journal entries, and the maps. He spoke of courage, responsibility, and careful planning. Brian watched with pride, realizing that the young boy was becoming a teacher of wisdom, just as his mother and father had intended. Thomas added details about the city visit and how the lessons had guided their actions. The neighbors nodded in understanding, impressed by the calm and careful approach the family had taken. As the afternoon turned to evening, Lila reflected on the past week. The house had been filled with visitors, challenges, and unexpected events. But through it all, every action had been guided by lessons learned long ago. The rifle in the corner, the chest of documents, and the medals had all become symbols of wisdom and care, not fear. Amir sat close to his mother. Mama, will we always have challenges? He asked quietly. Lila hugged him gently. Yes, Amir. Life will always present challenges, but now you have the knowledge to face them. You have learned to observe, think, and act with care. That is the true strength. Brian nodded. I have seen it firsthand. Strength is measured by responsibility and understanding, not just by what you hold in your hands or how fast you react. Thomas added, and the past is never gone. The lessons from our families continue to guide us, as long as we pay attention and use them wisely. As evening fell, the yellow house glowed softly in the fading sunlight. Lila, Amir, Brian, and Thomas sat together, quietly reflecting on the week's events. The neighbors had returned home, carrying with them the lessons shared by the family. The chests had been organized, the documents studied, and the wisdom of the past preserved. Amir looked at the rifle in the corner, then at the chest. Mama, I understand now. Every object teaches something. Every story has meaning. Courage is careful, and strength is wisdom. Lila smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride and calm. Yes, Amir, that is exactly what we hoped you would learn. And one day, you will share these lessons with others, keeping our family's wisdom alive. Brian stood and stretched, I have learned a great deal from your family. I will carry these lessons with me, and I will remember the importance of patience, observation, and careful action." Thomas nodded, and the records, the objects, and the stories will continue to guide us. History is not just what happened, it is what we learn and how we act today. As night fell, the yellow house grew quiet. The stars appeared in the sky, twinkling above the neighborhood. Inside, the house was filled with calm energy, a sense of accomplishment, and the promise of continued learning. Lila tucked Amir into bed that night. "Remember, Amir, the lessons are always with you. Use them wisely, and you will face every challenge with courage and understanding." Amir smiled sleepily. "I will, Mama, I promise." Outside, Brian walked to his car, reflecting on the extraordinary family he had met. He realized that true protection and strength were not always about rules or weapons. They were about knowledge, responsibility, and careful action. Thomas carefully organized the final documents before leaving. "These lessons will continue," he said quietly. "They will guide others just as they guided us." And so, the yellow house remained, quiet and warm. It held the chest, the letters, the medals, and the rifle, all symbols of careful lessons, courage, and wisdom. Lila, Amir, Brian, and Thomas knew that the past had guided them, and that the future would be shaped by the lessons they had learned and shared. The story of the family, their courage, and their careful understanding of responsibility would continue quietly, powerfully, and wisely, long after the stars shone above the peaceful yellow house.